Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Follow us, likes, double tap.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. Our format is 3 short stories, 1 big story, and wins and losses for the week. I'm with my co-host, Ann Zeta, who just got back from visiting family.
I did, and it was 113 degrees in Sacramento, California, which is very, very hot, although the humidity was like 16%. Yeah. So it was really dry.
Yeah, I was in Granbury, which is the first time I went to Granbury to hang out with my dad, and it being in Granbury now makes sense how the QAnon started there. I learned a lot, Sorry, but I did. I realized why I've never been there, but it looks like a beautiful place if it wasn't so stuffy and muggy. But it was really nice weather in Granbury after the rain.
Yeah, I was watching the weather forecast and I saw that it was raining in like 84 degrees here when I was suffering with 113. But it was a great trip. I got to see my mom and I got to see old friends and I got to see my kids. So it was good. Wednesday to Saturday, which is weird. My whole week is going to be thrown off because of coming back on a Saturday.
Yeah.
But I'll try to keep track of what day of the week it is and not miss anything this week.
You did it for the pod. I appreciate you.
I did.
Because we're going to be out for a while.
Yeah.
The next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think the next 2 months we only have 2 pods instead of 4.
Yeah,
Not every week.
Yeah. So, we got a full schedule for you guys today, some updates, and then the big story, obviously, is going to talk about tourism in Fort Worth. Do we do a good job? Where are we shining? Where can we see opportunity? But let's go ahead and dive into short story number 1. We're going to update you about the Fort Worth ban on discriminatory events on city property. There is a discussion on the format and the policy being removed. Now, if you remember the controversy that we discussed here, there was looking to be at the Botanical Gardens, the True Texas Project, a conservative activist group that started as the Northeast Tarrant Tea Party, is going to have its event on July 15th. That event is it's going to have different type of workshops and topics. Some topics were even things around white Christian nationalism, great replacement theory, the war on white America, these kind of topics. And really the history that you need to know is that the staff at the Botanical Gardens was looking to tell this Texas Project team, we were not going to host your event, but the city said we are required and have to. And so now the intertwines of the city are discussing what does things like this look like in the future, and are we covering our butts in the case of anything happens?
Yeah, I think that this first came up with some requests for reservations at community centers that were declined, and then maybe it was because they didn't fill out the application fully. Maybe it was because of the prospect of the thing that they were planning to do there. But they did end up having an event at one of the community centers. And I think that's what triggered this relook at the language in the policies for renting out city facilities. And in the case of the Botanic Gardens is owned by the city of Fort Worth, but managed by the Brit. And so this article indicates that they're looking at that it will be very likely that they will remove discriminatory event language from the reservation policies based on concern about free speech and regulating people's speech. And my only concern, well, I mean, not my only concern, but one of my concerns is that the city of Fort Worth has gotten high marks for its anti-discriminatory policies. And I believe that having this language in the reservations is part of that measurement and high marks that we have gotten for being a place that has high standards around anti-discrimination. And my worry is that, I would have assumed that when that language was created in the first place, that it was run through legal and it was found to be legal, but maybe it wasn't. I don't know, because I think most of it was there prior to my being on council. But there have been different ratings that are nationwide where the city has fared pretty well, especially when it comes to LGBTQ anti-discrimination, because we were one of the first cities to add that kind of language to our policies and employment requirements and all of that, and got over 100% ratings on that national ranking for many years. And my fear is that as we whittle away at some of this, that we won't be as welcoming and safe of a city for all.
Yeah. And I want to make sure I said July 15th is the event. It's their 15th anniversary, and the event is July 12th, followed by an all-day conference July 13th. And it's going to feature several prominent speakers as well. Like when you talk about safety, it's not only just, to me, making sure that people are safe and feel seen and heard in Fort Worth, but it's also the kind of energy we're bringing into the community. I mean, one of the keynote speakers for this event is Kyle Rittenhouse, who shot and killed 2 people during a 2020 racial justice protest in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And if anything, regardless of how you felt Kyle Rittenhouse served that situation, that was a situation where I don't think we want what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin to happen in Fort Worth, Texas, that animosity, the toxicity, the clashing between two worldviews. To me, you need to have free speech, but you also need to manage restlessness. And our people that you're bringing in to these events,
rallying that up
and creating, in uncertainty. And that's, to me, like the big part here. I mean, you mentioned we ranked high marks and with the what we're doing for the LGBTQ community. But if you look at also there, just in, I believe back in April, the Texas Latinos United for Conservative Action booked the Victory Forest Community Center to host an event titled "The Danger of Transgenderism." City's leadership eventually canceled the event, reserving citing an incomplete reservation application for the group. But if they would have completed that, would that have been okay? Because
they did go ahead and fill out another form and rent. The first application was at Victory Forest Community Center. Their second application was at Fire Station Community Center, and they did have that event there. Yeah. And there was a counter protest at the time. People just showed up peacefully, showing support to LGBTQ people in the adjacent park. And I don't think there was any interaction between the two groups. And I think that's an excellent way to handle those kind of things, to show your support for a community instead of just getting into a back and forth with people that you believe are discriminatory, which I believe that they are as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the other last kind of piece on this short story is like these kind of nuances aren't happening at the council level, right? There's not voting. There's not going to be, it feels like, statements from council people to talk about how they feel about this, because it's very much at the managerial level and they're going to figure it out there. As a former council member, do you feel like this is okay, or do you feel like the statements or people might say something or do a lot of questioning for their constituents? Like, how do you see that panning out?
Well, I think that you can always talk to your council member and make your opinions aware to staff, who, even if it's a staff decision, even if there's not a public meeting. I think that there was some indication at the end of this article that with as much focus and concern as has been expressed, that it might be beneficial to allow the public to weigh in on this. And there are times in the council meeting where people can come and weigh in on things that are not agenda-sized. So there's still the ability to do that. But, it's interesting in a city manager form of government what things fall under the purview of the council and what things are a staff decision. I think, like I said, council members can always have influence over staff decisions, even if it's not something that's agenda-sized for them.
Yeah. I think the other part that, the conversation around freedom of speech is always a tough one, because it doesn't mean there's freedom from consequences of what you say or stand up for. And I think maybe this needs to be a conversation more about freedom of speech and less about freedom of speech and more about what kind of consequences do we feel like we can live with in Fort Worth if worst case scenarios happen in situations, or, a different type of consequence comes, because I imagine now in July on these dates, the 12th and the 13th, there will be some type of, like you said, peaceful protesting at the botanical gardens, maybe in front of the gates while people are going in and out. And what does that kind of create on a busy street right there in Fort Worth? So I don't know. I think it's a difficult thing when people want to protect freedom of speech, but realize there's also consequences when we just let people do whatever they want.
Yeah, I don't think there's a real total clear answer here, but I definitely think that people that I know and love feel threatened by this type of activity happening in our city. And I think that it is incumbent on us to make sure that the voices of the people who are accepting and tolerant and I guess the other side speak up and make sure that people understand that they are still safe here.
Great. Now we're going to go ahead and move into short story number 2. It's a kind of another update around power and dynamics, but this time at the county level. Tarrant County Courts is looking to tackle fraud, waste, and abuse with a new report. This is a Star Telegram article by Noah Alcala-Bach, and the group was formed April 2nd. Commissioner's Court meeting where a reorganization of the courts was proposed, and County Judge Tim O'Hare suggested there was abuse in the court system, saying we don't want to see people get paid for 40 hours of work when they're really working 10 hours. We don't want to see mismanagement of dollars when somebody is being paid more than their salary is supposed to be. The Tarrant County has unanimously decided on measures to hold judges and court employees accountable and improve the efficiencies of the courts to reduce the Tarrant County jail population. It's important to know that today these are made up of 21 Republican judges and their staff. The committee was made up of judges, county leaders, and attorneys. The Star Telegram obtained a copy of the committee's report, which calls for substantial changes. The report recommends a measure that would publicly track the number of inmates in Tarrant County jail waiting for their day in court and how many cases judges hear. It also calls for a review on the efficiency of the courts to be presented in January 2025.
So I think what the interesting thing is that back in April, when this was first brought up, the county commissioner's court and the judge were basically saying, we're moving forward with kind of taking over the courts. And I think that at the time it included both the criminal court and the civil courts. And now what they have moved forward with is probably what they should have done in the beginning. And that was include the people that they're concerned about in the conversation so that they can have full information and input from the folks that are actually doing this job. So the administrator that had been hired previously and was managing the courts has stepped down. And I think that is what the county judge and some of the commissioners were wanting to move towards, because I think they thought that that was redundancy or that that was a cost saving measure. But he has stepped down. And I don't know exactly what happened to the civil courts, but this is now just focused on the criminal courts. And I think one of the positive outcomes is this whole occupancy of the jail situation. And they're creating a dashboard that's going to keep track of like how long people have been in jail and how many cases go through certain courts and which courts hear how many cases and what the outcomes of those cases are and how many of those people are in jail and remain in jail and the number of times that a sentence ends up coming to fruition that is shorter than the amount of time the person has already spent in jail. So therefore they're just released immediately at that point. I think that can be a positive outcome of all this, because we do have overcrowding, too many people in the jail situations, and maybe this can help with the reform of the jail. The concern I have, and I'm not a criminal courts expert, but if you are a judge and you're beholden to reporting data to a dashboard where the outcome of what you're trying to accomplish for those courts is, to lessen this or increase that, is that going to have an impact on the individual cases that you have before you as a judge? I, as someone who had to go before a judge, would not want the outcomes of some kind of data collecting system to influence whether or not a judge expedited something in my case or, it was slower than it would be. I just feel like individual cases need to be carried out in the best light and interest of those cases and not negatively influenced or impacted by stats being collected of an outside group trying to kind of control. And then the other thing is there not separate branches of the government that are supposed to remain separate and keep each other kind of in check, but not like take each other over? Because it very much seemed like the legislative branch trying to take over the judicial branch at the county level.
Yeah, I think that's another big part of the issue here, because if we remember, there was the gentleman who left his post. He resigned, Greg Sugart, who was in this position, and now his position won't be renewed, and now a 3-member elected judge panel will oversee the criminal courts, which is a step in the direction of what you were just kind of saying.
Because that panel's going to include some judges, but also county commissioners.
Yeah.
But then hearkening back to, and we keep doing this, what Bud Kennedy said about nobody being the boss of anybody at the county level, it looks like the commissioners and the judge are trying to become the boss of more people.
Yeah, yeah. And the part when you were saying that this could expedite, so like the negative consequence there you're saying is that like maybe a judge tries to, or like a lawyer who's representing an individual could want this person to just accept the decision so it moves faster rather than fight against it. Like what is an example of that kind of going?
I mean, that would be one example. I think if you're looking at your numbers and you're like, oh shoot, I'm not expediting enough cases through, then something could get rushed.
Yeah.
And so then it could be a negative thing for the defendant, or it could be a negative thing towards, for the prosecution.
Looking at the report color coded, this is kind of their setup. They're calling it the jail population benchmark, which states that contingency plans will be activated when the jail population transitions from green, the least severe, when there are less than 4,060 inmates, to yellow, to red, to black. The most severe, when there are more than 4,800 inmates, that's when it would go black. As of Wednesday morning, 4,190 inmates were in Tarrant County Jail. The average stay was listed as 133 days. Can you help me understand? Because this is something I completely don't understand. So a lot of times people get arrested and then they're held in jail
because they can't bond out.
Which is an issue in itself. Yep. And then then you're waiting for your trial, and then what happens when you stayed in jail longer than what the judge says? Like, if the judge's like, oh, you didn't do really anything, I don't know why you're here, and now you're out, but you spent.
Well, I mean, you're not like reimbursed, or you don't get your time back, obviously.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there is any, I don't know for
sure,
but I don't think there's any way to make up for that. It's just like you time served, plus you were there for maybe extra time.
Yeah.
And too bad, so sad.
Yeah, that's awful.
Yeah.
And that's like I think just educating the basic group of people on like how crazy our jail system works is just, just wild. Like the fact that you can get arrested and then sit around for days without knowing if you were guilty or not, or you have consequences to something. I mean, it just kind of.
Well, I mean, I think it's if you have finances, you can get yourself bonded out, and if you don't, you can't, and so then you have to just stay there.
Yeah, and that is terrible. I mean, when you talk about inequity, it
doesn't really fall into the innocent until proven guilty situation.
We just talked about the freedom of speech, but you don't get a freedom to live just if you can't afford to
get yourself out.
Get yourself out. That it is when I look at people who fight the jail system, I don't see how you could look at this as a crazy ideology. Like, that's crazy that we have people sitting in jail simply because they can't afford bond, and then they don't get reimbursed, or because whatever ends up happening for their case. Like, that's just kind of very fascinating that this is a way we live in 2024.
And I'm not, like we've both said, we're not experts on this, so I don't know if we understand all of the nuances of it. But as I pointed out before, they did narrow the focus to just the criminal courts, and I'm not sure what caused that. The initial structure is still being finalized and will be submitted as part of the 2025 budget process for the Commissioner's Court. I mean, I think that it's good that they didn't just, take over like they originally started to, and that there's actual judges on the committee.
Yeah.
And then they talk about, I think that anytime you don't have a clear chain of command and a clear oversight, that it becomes muddy and employees and employers don't know what to expect. And I thought that was amusing, that they think that's something they should delve into on the court side of things, but then they can't even get the sheriff to show up and give reports to them.
Yeah.
So they've got concerns about the chain of command here when there's other areas of chain of command that I think might be a little more important or just as important.
Yeah, that's another great point. Let's go ahead and move into short story number 3. We're going to kind of dive into 3 education-based articles for the third story, starting with a Dallas Morning News article. Texas kids lose up to 4 months of learning with new uncertified teacher study finds. Most students have educators without a state certification as Texas schools need to fill the classrooms. Students are losing out on months of learning. A study by Texas Tech University Jacob Kersey examined the ramifications stemming from an explosion of uncertified teachers across the state. Students with new uncertified teachers lost the equivalence of about 4 months of learning in reading and 3 months in math. However, the data showed that if an uncertified teacher had previous classroom experience, such as working as a substitute, students performed on par with those taught by certified educators. The number of uncertified educators have been on the rise across Texas, seeing a sharp spike in the years since the COVID pandemic. The analysis from Dallas Morning News found that roughly 1 in 3 new teachers hired in the state during 22-23 school year were uncertified. In 2019, the year before COVID-19, that figure was at 12%. So you're looking at 12% to 33% as the new number. State has no way to know if uncertified educators received rigorous training before stepping into the classroom.
But it was interesting because they said it's important that teachers have experience with kids, which I think, yes, really? That's kind of a no-brainer to me. It's interesting to me because I think that if they're uncertified but they have classroom experience, that seems to have been a benefit enough. It's the uncertified without classroom experience where you have this detriment, which clearly that seems like a double whammy of not being prepared for a job. And I think what this comes down to is the position that we've gotten ourselves into coming out of COVID, where they're so desperate for teachers that this is what they had to resort to have somebody in the classroom. So if they're just sitting there babysitting and not actually teaching, then that's how you end up with 4 months behind.
Yeah. You're having it also said uncertified educators made up 45% of full-time new teacher hires. Their distribution across the state was uneven. Rural district hired these teachers much more often, which is a fascinating thing I didn't know, at a rate 4 times higher than the non-rural communities. Different regions of the state also had striking disparities in the percentage of certified versus uncertified teachers hired in recent years. In Region 10, which includes Dallas, as well as many other smaller districts, about 46% of new hires were uncertified. And then it kind of shows a graph showing the different numbers. So, I mean, like Region 3, Victoria, Texas, 70% uncertified. Mount Pleasant, Region 8, 60%. So you're seeing Amarillo, 55%.
And I think that as far as reading loss goes, it's because a lot of times that teachers that are not certified don't have the skills to identify when there might be learning differences that would require additional services, such as students that have dyslexia. And that qualified teachers are trained to recognize those signs and get an early diagnosis. And hiring uncertified teachers has likely resulted in significant underdiagnoses of dyslexia.
Yeah. Almost 3/4 of uncertified teachers had no prior experience in Texas public schools. About 16% are former paraprofessionals who provided classroom support, tutoring, or other assistance on campus. Nearly 1 in 5 new uncertified teachers did not have a bachelor's degree. He cautioned that the researcher that this data is self-reported by school districts. Discrepancies may stem from administrative issues. However, those data errors are unlikely to account for the trends, he added. I wonder if this is just like going back to like markets and like, bull market, bear market. Like we're just in a very bear market of education. So that means when there is a low unemployment rate and there's a lot of jobs, less people become teachers. Obviously the pandemic, you're seeing a rise also of people getting out of the position. But I wonder as more companies are having hiring freezes and maybe letting go more people, does the education, 5 to 10 years from now get a reboot and people reconsider the profession?
Well,
And this is just a rise of ups and downs. I don't know over
I
history.
think we haven't even touched on the fact that we have a governor who's trying to bring in vouchers. And I feel like anybody who's in the teaching profession is probably looking at that and thinking, this is not a stable career path for me. And just not knowing if they're going to get the funding that they need to get paid, to get the raises all along the way. So I think anybody who was kind of teetering on, should I move on to something else, did that. And so that also led to a lack of people wanting to teach. Not to mention they bring up the fact that this didn't include charter schools because they don't have the certification requirement. So we don't know what the learning loss might be there, and just to the question of if they don't require certified teachers, then, are they measuring these things in the same way with the same scrutiny that public schools are being measured?
You also had an article which will be shared in here around what you just said about the vouchers, right? There's been Governor Abbott ran the campaign to get his donors to attack the people who were against his program, and he won that this last election. So, and there's clear.
Well, they haven't voted on it yet, but they think that they have enough people who support it now that they could move forward with it.
Yep. So, there's a lot here that I feel like I could talk about, but due it to being a short story and something we constantly kind of bring up, I think we kind of get the gist of the importance of teachers, people, if they are uncertified, having some type of background with students. But I think it's also an interesting spot because I just don't know how we get out of it. It just seems like a hard problem that continues to show up.
And the other story that we had that falls into this education was the more students got zeros on the STARS writing questions, and it isn't just a Texas problem. But I think this is interesting because, I have a friend who's an English teacher, so I didn't talk to her about this article, but I really would like to get her take on it. The whole switch over to having computers score these tests, but at the same time as they added some more written responses instead of just filling in the bubbles, which I can see a computer scoring that test very easily, but written responses where you're asked to read a material, respond to prompts that include putting something from the material into those answers. And they were saying that some of the students just might not have been as familiar with this format. And so it goes back to that whole teaching to the test, or are we teaching the things and then testing on the things that the kids learned in the classroom? So I don't know the answer to this either.
Yeah, I read a book about this like maybe a month ago called The Knowledge Expert, and it was talking about how we teach kids for the test. And so they don't actually build any knowledge on, like, history gets brought up later, science gets brought up later, a timeline of structure so kids don't know the different time periods of, right, when we, when there was slavery, when there was Martin Luther King. Like, the idea of time is so lost on these kids, and we don't teach them context and knowledge, which the book basically says if we started with history, science, and knowledge, kids will naturally learn how to read and write. But instead, we're focusing on the reading and writing piece. And I thought that was interesting. The other part that I actually forgot to bring up was I was on July 4th with my stepsister who just got out of becoming a teacher. She left the teacher role. She's in a new job for 6 months at a company now doing something else. And I asked, why did you leave the profession? Her answer was the parents. Parents are the hardest part because parents think they can call you at 9 p.m. They think they could email. They're very big on their kids and who their kids are and what their kids need, and they don't realize kind of like all the pieces that go to making a decision as a teacher, because you have 30 other kids you also have to consider. So just managing why you make decisions about a group of kids and then getting pressed or penalized by a set of parents who, yeah. So I thought that's also
that's like Jim used to say that he would like to coach a team of orphans because of the parents.
yeah.
That parents can be a pain.
Yeah. The last education article on here was a Star Telegram article about Fort Worth ISD said it cut 130 3 jobs due to fleeting COVID funds. Record says differently. This is Lena Ruiz, Star Telegram. Basically, the Fort Worth ISD School Board finalized on February 13th a workforce reduction of 133 positions. The district said that it's because of the loss of ESSER dollars, but according to kind of what this article is showing is that the Star Telegram did a public information request, and what returned was a list of 254 cut positions, almost twice as the number previously disclosed. 133 positions. Only 63 of those 133 positions were ESSER funded. Now, while we were kind of navigating and reading this whole story, the complex part of that is that some people were switched to other positions, so were they really removed? And then also just like it's very constant to see how ESSER dollars gets moved into as funding positions, but can quickly be changed. So I just don't know how like difficult it is to say like, man, this is really bad, or like was this, or were they trying to use an excuse that we are cutting for ESSER dollars when really the honest truth is
they were
enrollment.
cutting for ESSER dollars because that was an overall reduction in their budget.
Yeah.
Now, whether those positions were all funded by that, other positions being cut would open up dollars to be moved around in the budget to cover other things. So I just think it's more complicated than, lining up and saying, these are these positions, these are these positions. And I think that this kind of goes to show that when local media is doing their job, governmental organizations need to be able to answer the questions.
Yeah.
Because it just gets convoluted, and sometimes you'll see, didn't respond or can't respond based on ongoing, investigation or whatever. But I think that if the Fort Worth Report and the Star Telegram are attending meetings and hearing what is being said and reasons for why these things are happening, and then questioning that, somebody needs to explain it in a thorough way so that it doesn't sound nefarious. And yeah. I think what Fort Worth ISD is saying is that nothing nefarious was happening here, but it's challenging to read that through all of this article. So I think another thing that comes out in this article is the concern that during the time that people had access to the ESRA funding, that taxes were lowered in other areas. So they were reducing property tax money that was going to schools because they had that additional funding. I guess they didn't see that funding was going to come to an end at a certain point. But with the federal funding drying up, we're now going to start seeing the effect of those tax cuts. And they're going to have to reduce public services in order to keep a balanced budget. The states that have not cut their taxes in the last 3 years are going to be in a much better position to continue or to increase their investment in public education when the states that have chosen to cut their taxes in recent years. So, I mean, that's just another bad thing looming.
Yeah. The ESSER funds, it says like 50% of it was to labor. And to me, like, I think that's actually some of the stories I saw is that people who use those ESSER dollars on these one-time big purchase to upgrade state,
not an ongoing budget
correct,
item that would need to find another source to fund it in the future.
So that's what it's almost like. I don't know if ESSER funds was made to do hiring, and now that consequence is being seen by some districts who took that funds to do that to, like you said, solve the gap in salaries.
But this article also touches on the whole voucher debate that's going on in the Texas legislature right now, that despite having a $38.7 million surplus, teachers haven't seen any increase in pay, and that currently public educators are caught in the middle of this kind of funding battle.
Yeah, it's just a difficult time in the education space. And how do we navigate through it? I mean, again, I haven't been alive long enough to see is this like history repeating itself, and this is just kind of a wave of how education hate happens, and then somehow the balance of economies and value realigns, and people get back in the profession, and people get understand the value of it. I don't know where we are, or are we seeing a crushing of the system? And that's, I sometimes think of it like the United States Postal Service against FedEx and Amazon. Are we going through, what United Postal Service went with shipping packages. Are we going through that with shipping degrees and public education to now there's going to be some type of FedEx or Amazon who's managing our school systems? And I think that could be terrifying.
Sounds a little terrifying to me.
Let's go ahead and move into the big story where we titled, Is Fort Worth Doing Tourism Right? We are going to go through about 5 stories that kind of discuss tourism in several different angles. We're going to talk about it from the sports perspective, Fort Worth being the largest city without a major sports team. We're going to also talk about the increase of the Stockyards because Bud Kennedy wrote an opinion article about this. And, I think there's some discussion there as well. Also, we saw a survey by North Texas, and the results of this survey showed some interesting things about how they see themselves in the Metroplex. So we're going to navigate these stories together around tourism from sports, tourism from the Stockyards, and what does tourism's impact has on how people see themselves in communities in North Texas.
So the first article is a Dallas Morning News article that is entitled Inflation and Traffic Are Among the Top Concerns for North Texans, Early Survey Results Show. And I think you might have sent me this article today, and I recognized immediately that I took this survey, which was done by the University of Dallas, I believe. Yes, it's the University of Dallas. And they did this first phase of the survey and indicated that echoing concerns over inflation, property taxes, and housing costs topped the list of the biggest gripes for residents who responded, touting schools, safety, and shopping as their strongest likes in the first William Short Annual Quality of Life Survey from researchers with the Institute of Urban Policy Research at UTD, along with the North Texas Quality of Life Initiative. So I think what drew me to this, I saw it online. It was on one of the social media platforms, probably Facebook. And the Institute of Urban Policy Research is what drew my attention to it. But they were basically asking folks questions about what they see as how their quality of life is in their communities. And it's all of North Texas. So it's not just Fort Worth.
Which I appreciate.
Yeah.
I think we need to have more regional data and conversations rather than Fort Worth versus Dallas or Arlington.
Yeah, and I think
together.
The North Central Texas Council of Governments does a pretty good job of that. Not very many, I think, people realize what it is that they're doing regionally, but that is a source that one can go to see kind of what they keep tabs and put their fingers on the pulse of kind of what's happening regionally. But the survey sampled 5 geographic areas in Dallas-Fort Worth. Their initial sample is largely an online opt-in participant pool of about 1,200 respondents from Denton, Collin, Tarrant, and Dallas counties, of which I was one. And they expect to get up to 2,000 to release more detailed findings in the fall. The top concern seems to be inflation rising, but that seems to have been cooling off as of late. They talk about the median list price of a home skyrocketing from 2019 until now. People in the community taking the survey have concerns about inflation, and they're a lot less concerned about immigration. So that was one of the takeaways that some immigration organizations that work with immigrants, were pleased to see that there wasn't this huge pushback or fear of immigrants moving here. Yeah. But one of the things I found interesting is that they did a visual experiment in the survey where researchers presented respondents with different photos of homelessness in Dallas. The photo paired with the survey questions about affordable housing showed tents under bridges and homelessness on city streets. And support for affordable housing actually went down when people saw the presence of homelessness outside of the shops and on the streets, which is really disturbing because I'm not sure exactly what they can, are affiliating with between those two things. Because to me, if you see evidence of a homelessness, you would be more supportive of making sure that there's affordable housing and permanent supportive housing. But it seems like in this survey that the opposite happened.
I mean, that's kind of also what I felt about where it said almost half of survey respondents said they felt happy about their community. But at the same time, it says while 33% of respondents said they don't know their neighbors.
Yeah, I wasn't one of those. I know my neighbors.
Yeah, but like, so to say I feel like I have community, but then I don't know my neighbors, it's just like,
Yeah.
how did you answer that as well? I think this is kind of why we kind of started here. I think it's like we believe and we're advocates for tourism that supports and actually benefits the local people who also can participate and enjoy whatever tourism projects we are investing in our cities. And so we really want to start at this, like finding this new research to really decide, like, let's start a foundation here of how people feel, right? We feel congestion, inflation, costs, crime over immigration, comfort and happiness in our communities is relatively high, but yet we don't know a lot of people. Our image or perspective of homelessness and how we manage that is also, I think, a big conversation in the Metroplex. So let's now take all of this and from the lens of tourism, think, what does tourism do to make us as native residents of the Metroplex feel more positive in these situations? And so this idea of community, I think one of the big ones that I think we wanted to talk about is Fort Worth art scene. And the Fort Worth art scene in Fort Worth has been a very hot topic, and you know this better than I would, but there was a new research talking about how the arts in Fort Worth have generated $507 million, according to a recent study by Americans for the Arts. It seems like Fort Worth has an old school view on economic impact and sees art, doesn't see art for all its vibrance in the city. How would you explain data that's now coming out showing the impact it has on our city, but how does arts play with tourism, but then also the well-being of native residents?
So, the Arts Council has brought these numbers to the city and to the council for years. And I think it's just that, like you said, it's not those hard dollars. And so it's maybe folks who think that the arts should be something that's just supported on the side of the private side and nonprofits don't believe the numbers, but this study seems to be basically showing that there is a major return on investment for the funding that goes into the arts, with $507 million in spending that is generated by the arts in Fort Worth. And it was local Arts Fort Worth folks that did the surveys in our community. I remember filling out this survey at several events that I went to where it asked questions about how much did I spend in anticipation of participating in this arts event? Would I have gone to another community if this arts event had not been available in my community? Would I have, left the Fort Worth area to do that? Did I spend money on food or clothing or any of that kind of stuff in preparation to going to this art opening or whatever the other thing was? So the surveys were done here locally by our local arts organization, and not all of the arts organizations in all of the cities responded to their request to submit this information. But this is more than just the return of dollars spent in other areas, and it's more than just money from tourists. I think it is a clear indication the arts is something that is not only for tourists, it's for the people here. Yes. So if you have arts organizations like the world-class museums that we have, if you have local artists that are supported by both local people buying their art and tourists coming into town, that supports them being able to do those jobs. And so there's just numerous ways in which this is both beneficial to tourism and to the local community. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And I think that's, an interesting dynamic of how do we fund those things with a city that is continually trying to harp on being fiscally responsible and saying we're going to have a budget that just focuses on roads, cleaning up stuff, trash, water, and that's who we are. And how do you get to expand the value of building
the core function of government is kind of the minimalistic, don't put any money into anything except for the core functions of government. And I think these stories indicate the return on investment, both money-wise and culture-wise, that the city benefits from. Some of the other stories that we have talk about the Stockyards and Dickey's Arena and things that are happening in those places. And I think that the arts benefit, when I served on the city council, I was also on Visit Fort Worth's board as one of the elected officials that served on that board. And their focus definitely is on tourism and bringing in conventions and all of that. But because there are local electeds that serve on that board as well, and because the people that staff Visit Fort Worth also see the benefit in the positive things that they bring for tourists being positive for people who live in Fort Worth as well. I mean, I think I've said before that before the improvements to the Stockyards, the only time I ever went to the Stockyards was if somebody from out of town was visiting me and we went to look at longhorns walking up and down the street. Yeah. Now there are things in the Stockyards that I would go to as a Fort Worthian, not because I have somebody visiting from out of town. So I think that that's been a benefit both to tourism with the dollars it brings in, with the experience that a tourist has visiting the location, and for local Fort Worthians and what we want to do in our daily life and the quality of life that we live day to day.
I mean, that kind of, you're bringing up the Bud Kennedy article where he says, quit griping about the Stockyard is the best thing that could have happened to Fort Worth. I agree with half of that. I agree with half of don't gripe about Fort Worth, but about the Stockyards. But I don't know if I agree that it's the best thing that has happened to Fort Worth. I would argue the DFW airport is the best thing that's happened to the Fort Worth.
Maybe he meant in a long time.
and I also think because the problem with in tourism and how we invest in tourism specifically in Fort Worth is we really harp on like the cowboy culture, and obviously the cowboy culture is important with the Dallas Cowboys, the history of Texas, but the issue with the Stockyards is tourism. That's what we invest in. That's our anchor is like, yeah, it is great that people are coming to Fort Worth now because of the millions and millions of people who show up at the Stockyards. But now when I see these people around when I travel the country and they're like, oh yeah, I've been to Fort Worth. The Stockyards are cool. That's what they think Fort Worth is. Like they think we're a bunch of cowboys that, you know, are super Western and like our barbecue and, you know, does all this, which I'm not saying isn't us, but it's like, it's very shallow understanding of Fort Worth. If all you've done is gone to the Stockyards.
It's the same shallow understanding of Texas.
Yeah.
Basically, people who are not familiar with, haven't been to Texas, thinks everybody here has a horse, wears a cowboy hat, has boots, and, you know, rides to school on a horse.
Yeah.
It's like Australia where they think everybody owns a kangaroo.
Exactly.
I mean, these are just stereotypes.
Yeah.
And I think that if we do tourism right, we highlight the Stockyards, but then once people are here, and I think there's some quotes from our mayor where once people come here and see what Fort Worth has to offer, then they kind of more understand. But you have to get them to come and see more than just the Stockyards and the world-class museums, the, you know, great downtown, all these things would make someone stay longer. And some of the quotes in Bud's article about quit your griping, the people who are saying how amazing it was now are saying, I wish I'd scheduled more than a day. You know, it was too little. But I think that going back to the article about how people's quality of life is impacted and how we feel it, one of the things that people talk about is traffic and congestion. And if we're bringing all these people and we have all these hubs of places we want people to experience and we want to experience them ourselves, we need to figure out people getting around in a way that is more efficient than everybody just driving to these places. And the people who are coming from other places, they like to go to tourist destinations and not necessarily have to drive. And we still tend to emphasize parking and driving, which is unfortunate.
My kind of part with the Stockyards as it's like to me, and I'm understanding how my worldview is very different than the average Texan. But for me, when I travel, I think about the places that I enjoy the most. It is because I now know I'm visiting neighborhoods. And I think Fort Worth is stuck between being Arlington or Dallas. I think Arlington is an example of tourism done just to entertain, have an event, take
massive events.
Take people's money and then they leave back on a plane. Where people go to Dallas, they go, oh, I want to go to Deep Ellum. I want to go to Oaklawn. I want to go to Bishop Arts. I want to go to neighborhoods.
And I think
that is something I don't know if Fort Worth is doing.
Visit Fort Worth does have an emphasis on that because if you go to their website, you will see that they highlight things like Magnolia and South Main, and they were starting to talk about like over on Race Street, but they're very careful because they know that their audience are tourists. And if a place is not robust enough that a tourist is going to come and go to that place and be like, what did you send me here for? Then that's going to be a negative mark on them
and I would
drawing
argue
tourists.
that all three of those spots aren't developed enough yet where tourists are like, I'm here for an hour maybe. But yeah, and I think so Fort Worth, it's right. So we have the zoo, we have the Stockyards, which is telling me our
the cultural district.
Yeah, yes, if people want to go to museums. I think that we're kind of stuck in the Arlington, right? We got to have the Six Flags and Hurricane Harbor. Ours is the zoo and the Stockyards. Like, I think people aren't visiting Fort Worth yet because of the neighborhoods and the community those neighborhoods project that people can come and enjoy. Yeah. Like, and I think that's the difference. Like Midtown in Atlanta. I love going to Atlanta. They have a walking, the great parks. You can walk up and down, and you don't have to go to any. Actually, their MLK stuff is kind of lame. Like, it actually should be, their actual tourist stuff is actually not that impressive, but they're actually living and walking the city and navigating different neighborhoods. I actually really like, and I feel like that's the opportunity that we miss with constantly doubling down on the Stockyards. I'm not saying the Stockyards are bad. I'm just saying we miss those
and
things.
I think a lot of times the tourist draw is a public-private partnership. So Visit Fort Worth partners with the property owners in various areas. And so the Stockyards has a large concentration of one property owner that has been able to influence a large redevelopment. Those neighborhoods you're talking about are not as cohesively under the control or management of one entity. And so it takes a little more time for those things to kind of germinate and grow. And I would say that near Southside is definitely has, a jump on most everybody else. The developers that moved into what is called the Foundry District, but it's off of West 7th. So there's, there's some synergy and some density there. And that
place had some challenges though.
Yeah. Well, flooding is definitely one of the major challenges. But yeah, it's hard. Whose job is it to cultivate that? Like, if it's just cultivated by your Convention and Visitors Bureau, then how authentic and realistic is it? But once the people
why is there not a Live Fort Worth? Why is there only a Visit Fort Worth? I guess is my question.
Well, I mean, Visit Fort Worth is the Visitor and Conventioners Bureau. That is their job.
Why is there not a Live Fort Worth? That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying Visit Fort Worth shouldn't exist, but why is there not a Live Fort Worth focused on building sustainable residents who want to live here longer than 2 years? Or there's objectives and goals around making Fort Worth more livable for people.
I mean, I think the city would like that to happen, but they don't own everything, so they can't make people develop or do in a certain way. But I would hope that the comprehensive plan might start to incentivize more of that.
Yeah. I
think it's up to you and I to be the Live Fort Worth.
Yeah. We're not as funded as Visit Fort Worth. You know what I mean?
We don't have a big, huge breakfast meeting with loud music and lots of swag and all of that. But we tend to try to share with people why we live in Fort Worth and the things that we like about Fort Worth. And the other thing that I think flies in the face of this is the whole "don't come here." There's a lot of people in Fort Worth that are basically like, roll up the carpet and don't let anybody else in.
I'm kind of sadly one of those people.
No, you're not. I don't believe it.
What we could now hit kind of on the last part of this kind of, tourism in Fort Worth. Are we doing a good job of it? Is it doing good for the constituents? I think going back to now talking about sporting, there was another opinion article in the Sunday paper by Mac Engel, and they were basically talking about this because the Major League Baseball All-Star is going to be here from July 12th to the July 16th. It's going to be in Arlington. Tens of thousands of people are going to show up. We're going to have the draft in the Stockyards. And so there's going to be a lot going on here. And so Mac Engel kind of created this kind of conversation around Fort Worth, Texas is the weirdest major league city in the United States because we're the 11th largest city, yet we don't have a major league team that includes soccer, that includes baseball, basketball, hockey, you name it. And really, I actually think he's really objective on it, and he shares kind of two sides of it, going back to like, oh, but really the Metroplex is all connected, so who cares that Dallas Cowboys is in Arlington? Like, that's still part of Fort Worth to me, even though it's not technically in Fort Worth. I know you and I are not the biggest. I'm probably more biggest sports person than you are, but what does sports play into?
Well, I know that
the
Visit
value of
Fort
cities.
Worth does have a focus on
Yeah.
sports tourism now. And so there has been more emphasis and more effort put into attracting. But I think this article talks about, I don't know if it was this article or a different one, that basically says that, we have kind of partnered with Arlington when a big, huge event came in and benefited from kind of spillover or a curated event that is affiliated with that big event happening in Fort Worth without having to, tear down a big section of our downtown and build some arena and then build roads that plow through historic neighborhoods in order to get people in and out of those places quickly. So I don't really want to do that. But I do like the things that they've curated, say, at Dickey's Arena with the gymnastics and
College basketball.
College
for
basketball.
March Madness.
Right. And then we had some big football thing was happening in the Sundance Square for a while. And I know Sundance Square was actually made in order to accommodate all of that in a way that didn't have cables
game
running.
Day. Like we had game day for.
Was that college?
Yeah.
See, I am showing my lack of knowledge about sports here, but the big game day thing that happened in Sundance Square where the trucks could be parked further away and the cables could be hidden. I mean, it was basically meant for that to happen, and that went away. Maybe.
Yeah, because then Texas Live showed up in Arlington, and now it's become the real hub for a lot of that. Yeah, I mean, I'm into sports. I'm into sports, and kind of we're talking about like, I think we do a good job with it. And maybe we are a sports city, but that sports city is just like rodeo cattle, and that's our team. Like our team is Western ag sports, right? We bring a lot of that to bull riding. We bring professional bull riding here. We do a lot of. Maybe that's our team. Like that's just it kind of goes with the Stockyards. Like,
but then Fort Worth Dickey's Arena is going to host 2 gaming world championships, so that's the opposite of that.
And that's also a good one. Go ahead. You could go ahead and kind of bring that one up.
So some of the top gamers in the world and their fans will descend on Fort Worth in September when the city hosts the Fortnite Battle Royale Global Championship and the Rocket League World Championship at Dickey's Arena. Unfortunately, my kids are total gamers, but neither of these games are their games.
Yeah, you're. In the gaming world, your kids play real games. These are like the kid games. Like
That's funny because my kid said that same thing. He was like, they I guess they need a big place for it because they need to have like hundreds of people to play it. And
like these are more for like little kids. Like your kid plays more. Your kid plays more advanced games.
Yes, they do.
But Fortnite and I'm a big like I think this is, and we've talked about this for years with Jimmy on being an esports hub, and you see a lot of it happen in Grand Prairie. John Golf is very invested. His son's a president, maybe I believe a president of some type of esports team. They're doing a whole bunch to do this kind of stuff, and this is also great. And can we be the people who do that? It feels like esports is covering all of the Metroplex right now, and I just think we're lucky to have it this one or few times. I think the kicker when we talk about a sports team, it's talking about something that plays a game every week, in the same stadium over and over again, where you can build camaraderie. And I think that's the part where I could totally see where I miss a Fort Worth, like something that brings Fort Worth together, where we're all going to the venue, watching this game, and when it's in season, we're going once a week, and we're talking about this sports team. But I don't know, because a part of me feels like if you're more into sports, you probably can say you're getting that with the Stars and the Mavericks and the Rangers, who all participated in post-regular season performances this last year. The Rangers won the World Series. Dallas Stars went really far, and the Mavericks went to the finals. So you're having a lot of these Dallas teams actually be good, and maybe because you and I are maybe not sports people, a lot of Fort Worth people do feel connected to sports and camaraderie, even though we don't have an official team ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, there's major sports in the region.
Yeah.
And I know people in Fort Worth go and participate in all of that. I'm not one of them.
Yeah.
I've been to a few baseball games. It was very hot until they moved it all inside. I haven't been to one since they moved it inside.
Global Life Park, whatever it's called. That place is nice. That place is really nice.
And I know there is an esports facility in Arlington. Like their original convention center got turned into an esports venue. I took my kids there a couple of times for different things. And then the Magic the Gathering is not computer. It's like a card game. That's what my kid was in town for recently, and that was in Dallas. Again, I'm showing my lack of knowledge about these things. I
think like looking at this is just like what I know I'm against is funding and voting on giving stadiums tax breaks to build them here. Like I am actually think like that's like what happened in Kansas City. I don't know if you remember Saul, where Kansas City was trying to get a tax or some type of thing to
build a new arena.
Yeah, and the voters voted against it.
Right.
And then the Dallas mayor tweeted,
come on over here
and move it. And because I don't think economically I don't think economically it's worth it. But I feel, and that's my other argument about tourism, is like I don't know if I feel passionate about tourism's good for a city so much that I think we get an ROI out of giving these abatements and like benefits to it. I just don't. It'd be awesome to see like a report if the Star Telegram or the Fort Worth Report did an analysis on of all the times we brought a tourist thing to the city, what was their projected attendance and their projected expense like we were going to spend. And how many times did we actually meet those numbers, exceed those numbers, or didn't come close? And I want you to put every one thing that we show up, the main Fort Worth Festival, Art Festival, the solar eclipse, whatever the thing that we were selling for that week, month of the year, how much did it actually hit our numbers and goals?
I think they keep track of all that. They could probably produce that.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to the article about the arts and, the benefit that it brings, that is something that, I mentioned before when we were kind of filtering through all these articles and talking about what we were going to say about them. There's one topic that I will bring up every single time that I can about funding the arts, and that is that we have a hotel occupancy tax that goes towards tourism, and we are showing that the arts scene generates $507 million in spending, and yet we don't allow the arts to use hot tax, and that I think is just complete nonsense. Yeah. Our hot tax right now is pretty tied up in expanding the convention center and things like that, but it won't be tied up in that for forever. And I think we should look at funding some of these other things because I think it is important, getting back to the overall thing of do we do tourism well, and is it of benefit to those of us who live here versus visit here? And I think that always needs to be kept front of mind by everyone who serves in our city, regardless of if they are part of the Convention and Visitors Bureau with Visit Fort Worth or whether they're the elected officials that are technically the ones who should be leading this charge of live here instead of just visit here.
Yeah. No, you did good there. I'm done. Trying to see if there's really anything else we need to hit. Yeah, I think, and I think my wrap, and the reason why I think the art part here is if I had to pick between arts, sports, tourism, events, arts, and what I would also dive into the arts is small businesses and restaurants. Like to me, how hard it is to run an independent restaurant is so difficult. I mean, there's places that are busy and they're still feeling like they're concerned about their bills. Like I have a lot of local entrepreneur friends and like them stressing about payroll or paying their next rent. And I'm like, my life would be horrific and it's awful if y'all weren't here. Like what would I'm proud of my place because of the places I visit. And if things I visit Fort Worth, the coffee shop or the restaurant that I like to go to have pho or whatever, these places to me are more important to me than the Stockyards or Cowboys Field. It's the day-to-day things I visit. And maybe that's the expansion of Visit Fort Worth, is that Visit is like there's a conglomerate piece of like regular visitations that our citizens go to on a regular basis. That's visiting Fort Worth. I visit it every week. I go to the same 3 coffee shops every week to support them. And if all 3 of those weren't there, I would feel like I'm no longer living in the city I thought I was.
And it takes more than just you visiting, EJ,
exactly.
Which is why you need to be open to other people coming into your neighborhood and visiting those coffee shops because they can't make it by just you visiting 3 times a week.
Yeah, but then that's also the kicker too. It's like I think it feels like it's like that's what me and my wife talk about is like these places that we visit need probably 200 to 400 more versions of me and her. But when we look at our income, what we're able to make, we always max tip. Like we max tip every time. We have the privilege to do that. And like, there's not more of those visiting the east side and it's like, I literally feel like I'm on a constant run, constantly eating somewhere because I want these places to exist, but they need 100 of me and I don't know where they're going to get them.
And this is why I think it's up to us individually to be promoting this shop local, visit local, support local.
Yeah.
Because it getting robust enough to where a Visit Fort Worth is going to be sending tourists there is not going to happen without our local input in kind of incubating them up to that level. And then if it becomes a huge tourist destination, are we all going to start bitching about how crowded they are and be mad that more people are in these places and our friends that run these entrepreneurial businesses
are now doing well
and not having to stress every week to pay their bills?
But do you also have I think that's another data point that we should be tracking is when people visit the Stockyards, how much of what they're transacting going to the big corporation to a local business, because that's also a good sign of good tourism and bad tourism is, and it's tough because I think like this private equity world, I mean, it is eating up everything. I feel like everything is getting purchased and bought and like stacked together and nothing today is independent. I mean, right? Avoca's been gone for a while. Like they're not owned by anybody. I mean, they sold it. I mean, and what do you see in Avoca on the Stockyards? But it took a brand that was once local, ran by local people who no longer own it. And I feel like you have a lot of that happening too, is where in order to make it as a successful restaurant, the whole goal is to sell it to the corporation. So you got to get big enough with a big enough brand to sell it to the big guys who then pitch you in the airport or who then pitch you in the Stockyards. And I feel like that's also a tough part about.
Well, I mean, running that kind of a business, like a restaurant or a coffee shop, is a beat down.
No lie, yeah.
So do you want your friend who owns that place to be beat down for the rest of their life, or do you want them to be able to do that?
Well, that goes back to teachers and other positions. I wish they just got paid a livable wage so that they could make the money that they want to make while running one restaurant.
Yeah.
And just running it really good. Maybe 3. Cool. But you don't have to then go sell it and then the people we sell it make it a shell of themselves. And that's all we're becoming is like everything is just on a corporate stack of the same people who own Yard House, owns Olive Garden, owns Papa Do's, owns that, and then we all just live on their stack when
I don't go to any of those places.
I know, but I think but we're a rare few of people who don't do that, and that's just like it's so hard. It's just tourism is hard, business is hard, and visiting the things and supporting the things that make this place special. It sometimes feels like a lonely fight.
So maybe it's like another call to action.
Yeah.
That we need all of our people here to start.
Yeah.
Or continue. Because some of them do.
Oh, no. I think if you're listening to this pod, you're 100% in saving Fort Worth the right way. Yeah. So, but no, we would love to hear your guys' thoughts, your talks on like, does Fort Worth does tourism correctly? In what areas? I think we're here to say that I think Fort Worth does do a solid job at tourism. It has elevated us in a lot of ways. You can't knock the data of the Stockyards and what it's brought. Do we need a sports team? You could call that a failure because we don't have one. And there's plenty of ways we could have one. I'm a WNBA fan. I would have loved the WNBA team to be in Fort Worth, but instead they're moving to Dallas. Then you talk about arts. I mean, you could argue that we're not doing a good job at supporting the arts. I mean, I think there's a lot of local artists who would feel like Fort Worth needs to do better.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I think some of those people have stepped up to create organizations and synergy to do that. Yeah. And those of us who know about those groups, like Support Fort Worth Art, need to step up, because if one individual continues to have to do all the work and the heavy lifting of that, that's going to burn out eventually.
Yeah.
So there's some upcoming stuff. Actually, that might be my win. I was kind of sorting through. So.
Well, we're here. We're actually into wins and losses. So we like to end with the wins so we can end on a positive note. So we're going to go into our losses. I'm glad you found a win mid-pod. I know y'all were worried that Ann wasn't going to have a win this week. That's impossible because
It
there's...
can't. I have to have one. Going from turning all of my losses into wins to struggling to find a win is not a good scene.
So I am going to. I'll go ahead and dive into my loss. I actually couldn't really find a hard loss. So my loss just comes from a recent article that just was posted, and it was in the Wall Street Journal that I read, and I really was. I brought it up because it was talking about old people voting and how much does the voting goes to comes from old residents, and it made me think about also how then those numbers change when it comes to feedback from the comprehensive plan that we talked about last episode. And so my loss is that today in America, old people have long punched above their weight politically because they vote proportionally more than the young. In the 2022 U.S. midterm election, about 2/3 of citizens 65 and over voted. So 66% almost, more than double the turnout rate for people 18 to 29. So, you're talking about 32% of people 18 to 29 voted. And so I just consider that loss to continue to have difficulty to have engagement of youth in the citizen participation of society.
So my loss is a story that was in Fort Worth Magazine that said a new study indicates Fort Worthians take the shortest drives. And EJ read that headline and thought that it meant we had like the shortest commutes and that this was a positive thing. But no, that is not what it means. What it means is that Fort Worthians get in their car and drive the shortest distances instead of taking some other form of transportation like walking or biking or something else. And literally one of the examples was somebody getting in their car to drive across a parking lot to go from one store to another store. And I think that everybody will be like, oh, but it's hot here. It's hot here. We have to drive. I think that we allow the extreme few months that we have in the summertime when it is really hot, and I don't want anyone out there walking and endangering their lives by getting heat stroke, to permeate every other day of the year when it literally is not too hot to do something besides drive. So my loss is that this is where we stand right now.
Number one.
My goal is that we're number one above Las Vegas. Vegas. It's very hot in Las Vegas sometimes.
And they have one strip, and it's one big strip, and there's a lot of, walking there, and they're number two.
Yeah.
So Fort Worth, we are the number one city and getting in our cars for the shortest distance.
And people are wanting to sit in their car in traffic more so, even if it would be faster to walk in some of these places.
Yeah.
I mean, this was really illustrated to me years ago when I went to take my car in to get an oil change or something. And I told the dealership, this was out on Bryan Irvin, that I was going to walk to the Starbucks, which was across the street and down the block a little bit. And they said, oh, do you want a loaner car?
Now, yeah, I mean, I'm glad you have, this is a healthy Fort Worth loss, and I'm glad you found this article. It will be in the notes if you want to read the whole research, but it was fascinating. My win for today is this was found in the Dallas Morning News. Census Bureau, Hispanics now top Texas's demographics. Hispanics with over 12.1 million residents cemented their position as the largest demographic group in Texas, while the state also had the largest nationwide gains in Asian and Black residents, according to new population estimates. Texas has estimated population of 30.5 million people as of July 2023, and 12.1 million were Hispanic. So 12 million white non-Hispanics over the period. And so to me, it's a win that I guess that the diversity of of Texas is becoming a discussion, and I wonder what the future of America looks like when you can no longer blame the majority of Americans are white whenever we get to the situations of politics, class, elitism, exploitation. And now when we become a melting pot of people, when I'm 70 years old, what America we're going to live in is coming. And I think it's fascinating to see. And I think local news is even more important in places where there's a lot of minority spaces with a lot of different cultures and values and maybe lack of connectedness. And so I think it's a win that we are getting to that space, because I actually think that's a better America than the one we do live in today. But I don't think it means that we get to the other side fully, but I think it has us a chance to build more inclusivity when we have a melting pot of people from all walks of the world.
So my win is about the arts. And I mentioned previously the organization called Support Fort Worth Art, and they have an event coming up called Eureka. The description of this event is curious to learn more about an upcoming art show, Eureka. This show is all about creativity, collaboration, and community, and it's centered on a wall full of your ideas for what art you want to make or art that you want to see in the world. We hope you'll join us for some of the brainstorming events and contribute your ideas. You can also check out a new page on our website with even more information about the show, links to RSVP to the brainstorming events, and info on how to submit your ideas early. And these activities will be happening in August and September at the Pool, which is an art gallery on 8th Avenue near Southside. It's an art show without art, just ideas. It isn't an art show about the art that people have made. It is an art show about the art that people want to make. It's a place to experience the breadth and depth of the creativity present in our community and meet with potential collaborators and help bring ideas to life. So check out Eureka. We'll be at the Pool in the near South Side in Art Space from August and September. And the centerpiece of Eureka is a large wall of ideas for art that people want to make and art that people want to see existing in the world.
I love that is a great wrap of this episode to end on a thing that we can do to support Fort Worth. And get people out. So if you have, family or people visiting this summer, don't just take them to the Stockyards. Take them to a Eureka event. Thank you guys for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you
in a couple of weeks, I think.
Yeah, in a couple of weeks. Keep going, keep being great, and enjoy vacation and not thinking about Fort Worth some as you
explore the world and see what else is out there that you might want to make sure that we do here to make this place a place that people would want to visit, like you are going and visiting other places in the heat of the summer.
Boom.